with Charles Wong, and both of these decks are actually kind of revolutionized by a printing from the Scars of Mirrodin block, which is Green Sun Zenith. Certainly, like, Elves existed as a deck before that, but it's become much more consistent with a tutor. And Shawn Yu's deck is it's an aggressive Bant deck with a bunch of singleton and doubleton search targets that Green Sun Zenith can get. And so, like, the key interaction with this deck is Green Sun Zenith can be a turn 1 ramp spell by getting a Dryad Arbor, or it can get, a Gaddock Teague against a combo deck. It can get a Sylvan Safekeeper to help win the creature matchups, or it can get a value creature like a Qasali Pride Mage or a Scavenging Ooze, or it can get a finisher like a Knight of the Reliquary.
Well, Green Sun Zenith is a very versatile deck.
Yep.
Very versatile card. This is, I think, Shawn's deck is primarily, it's a Bant deck. It still functions primarily in the same way that, like, a Maverick deck would. Sylvan Safekeeper does kind of a bad Mother of Runes impersonation. The cards that matter particularly in it, it seems to me like a Maverick deck that's stretching to try to add Brainstorm in it a lot of the times and how it plays out.
Yeah, it wants some extra card selection, and Brainstorm is a great card. I think the real appeal is that he wants to have sideboard counter magic to shore up the combo matchup.
All right, starting out, we have Charles Wong starting on a Nettle Sentinel, swings for 2. Both players are on a 6-card hand here. He has a second Nettle Sentinel on the untap. He does have a natural Gaia's Cradle, as well as Priest of Titania and Quirion Ranger. So he does have a large mana capacity in his deck. Still, currently, he doesn't have any sort of combo flourish to it.
Yeah. So he wants a draw engine at this point, and he's totally okay with the Swords to Plowshares on the Quirion Ranger, or not on the Quirion Ranger, on the Priest of Titania. He's not going to be wanting for mana because of the Gaia's Cradle.
All right, so the end step Swords to Plowshares on Priest of Titania. Oftentimes you don't want to let someone untap the Priest of Titania because you're very worried about, that they'll just win on the following turn. Because Charles has a Gaia's Cradle, the Priest of Titania is not as much of a threat right now. Like I said, both players on a 6-card hand.
Okay, and so Shawn is resolving a Brainstorm. He sees a Jace the Mind Sculptor, a Vendilion Click, and a land off of that, which is much needed gas that he's seeing here because most of his hand was lands, so now he has some things to do, and then he plays a Wasteland to get rid of the Gaia's Cradle.
Right, so in conjunction, the fact that he had both the Swords to Plowshares and the Wasteland actually lowers Charles's comboing capacity because now his mana is actually a little touch and go. We see Charles plays Quirion Ranger to untap both Nettle Sentinels, and now he's kind of on the B plan of dealing damage right now, or at least until he's able to. He needs kind of a combination of 2 cards to really get off that plan.
Yep. So we see Shawn play a Gaddock Teague on his turn 2. Given that he has Jace the Mind Sculptor in his hand, do you like that play?
It seems a little aggressive. Gaddock Teague's a pretty dead card against Elves. It stops Natural Order, which right now I think you'd be a little worried about Natural Order for Craterhoof or maybe a Natural Order for Regal Force. So in that sense, if Charles had had that card, he'd be worried. This play makes sense. He'd be worried, I guess, about Charles doing something like Heritage Druid into Natural Order, which would be a possible play here. That said, if Shawn's only follow-up is Jace the Mind Sculptor, then I don't like the play at all.
Yeah, so Charles draws a fetch land for the turn, and he does have a Green Sun Zenith in his hand that's currently stranded by the Gaddock Teague. He's considering whether he wants to offer the trade with one of his Nettle Sentinels or not.
Well, he almost certainly doesn't want to offer the trade right now. There's not too much to worry about us at a Bant. I guess the thing, Elves will continue to make more creatures, and so if he wants to start suiciding his guys or trading his guys, he has that option available. He actually does push in to get 4 damage.
Yep, and so he's able to use the interaction of Quirion Ranger in order to save his Dryad Arbor there, returning it to untap the Nettle Sentinel.
Right, and I'm not sure that I find it's a little curious that Shawn decided to block the Dryad Arbor instead of a Nettle Sentinel in that case. So that now he's actually just allowing Charles to have free damage.
Yeah, so Shawn maybe thinks that he is getting value off the Gaddock Teeg that's shutting down cards in Charles's hand, and Charles mistakenly shows him a card that is shut down.
Right. I mean, nothing's. Yeah. I mean, Shawn's playing his 2 drops because Shawn's stuck on 2 lands. At
So
the moment.
Charles accidentally untapped his second Nettle Sentinel. We need to fix that.
Right. Yeah, it
and,
does not naturally.
Shawn is
untap.
able actually to fix that for him.
Yeah, there are no creatures in the yard as of yet, so Scavenging Ooze is still just a Grizzly Bear. But once that becomes a 3/3, then Charles his game plan will have to change once there's actually an attacker that can just start eating his things.
Yeah.
Or block
And it looks like Charles has a second Green Sun Zenith in hand. Shawn, on the other hand, has drawn a land for the turn. He has 2 Jace the Mind Sculptors, a Vendilion Click, and a Knight of the Reliquary in hand. So he's pondering which of his 3 drops he wants to cast.
Knight of the Reliquary is pretty huge. It gives Shawn a win condition under the Gaddock Teeg. So even though he has a pair of Jaces, Shawn should be somewhat able to win this match without a Jace the Mind Sculptor.
And so we're shuffling here, and we're expecting the Knight of the Reliquary, which is going to be able to get larger and larger until the point that it starts attacking.
Yeah, Shawn also has a Vendilion Click, so he has no shortage of plays, despite the fact that he has eliminated some of his cards in his own hand. So then kind of the pressure right now is on Charles. He has Shawn down to 6, but once the Knight of the Reliquary is not summoning 6, Charles's method of just attacking is pretty much over here. He can either he can try to flood the board for 6 damage. With 3 blockers, that's pretty hard. He'd have to have somewhere around 6 elves in play. The other thing he can try to do is still combo, which is possible to do under a Gaddock Teeg. Probably, so what he'd want to do is, like, the kind of combo he's going for here, because he can't natural order, is he's going to have to go for a Glimpse of Nature chain. So if he's drawing elves right now, like, say he's drawing 1-drops, rather than, he could be committing them to the board to try to flood past 3 blockers. It's probably more likely what he can do is hang on to them in hopes of getting a Glimpse of Nature chain started.
Yep. So we saw Charles untap his Nettle Sentinel using the Quirion Ranger ability at the end of Shawn's turn, and then after drawing a Gaia's Cradle, he passes it back. At the end of Shawn's turn again, he does the same trick to get the other Nettle Sentinel up, and it looks like Charles just has, so Charles draws a third Nettle Sentinel for his turn, decides to commit it to the board. His hand now is 2 Green Sun Zeniths and a Gaia's Cradle.
Right, so the Green Sun Zeniths both uncastable. There are no removal spells in the main deck for Charles, so the Green Sun Zeniths are actually dead cards. So by committing Nettle Sentinel to the board, that's actually a little bit of a confusing play to me, because especially with the Dryad Arbor in play, Charles isn't really going to be able to attack for the remaining 6.
Yeah.
There's an argument to me that Nettle Sentinel will be a good mana producer, but if he draws something like a Heritage Druid, I don't think he'll be at a shortage of an opportunity to recast Nettle Sentinel then.
So we see Shawn at the end of turn Vendilion Click himself to put a Jace the Mind Sculptor on the bottom of his library, then turn his Dryad Arbor into a Karakas using the Knight of the Reliquary, setting up the ability to bounce Gaddock Teeg to get his Jace down. He also chooses to sacrifice the Dryad Arbor so that he has food for his Scavenging Ooze should he need it.
Right, and the bouncing Gaddock Teeg play is pretty relevant here. If Charles can start Fate Sealing, that should be able to lock Charles out of the game.
So Shawn decides to attack for 3, and then passes the turn.
Yeah, that said, I still don't like I don't like the play of bouncing Gaddock Teeg at all. Charles is doing so little right now that, he's activating, by doing that, he doesn't know that he's activating a handful of Green Sun Zeniths, but he would be.
Yeah. Well, Charles accidentally showed 1 to him. Shawn has the ability, if he wants, by tapping the Knight of the Reliquary, to be able to cast the Jace the Mind Sculptor and then recast the Gaddock Teeg on his turn if he bounces now.
Right, once he has... Yeah, right, because Knight of the Reliquary can function as a mana creature on 1 turn.
It's unclear if that actually is what Shawn wants to do.
I don't think Shawn's particularly disappointed in how the board state is right now. It's an option for him to do that, but so the only reason he'd want to play Jace is if he's really worried about Charles's live top decks. The Fate Seal ability is pretty relevant here. Based on how the board's playing out, I'm not particularly worried if I'm Shawn about that.
I agree. I think, despite Gaddock Teeg mostly being dead in this match, it's doing a good job of keeping the dangerous top decks out of the way. And given how Charles is playing his hand out, he's making his glimpses so much weaker, as you've noted, that Shawn doesn't have a lot to worry about.
Yeah, I think the cards that can would be problematic here would be, I suppose if he has 2 more creatures, then like Heritage Druid in combination with Regal Force would be a problem. A couple turns ago, Deathrite Shaman would have been a problem because it could have actually dealt the remaining 7 damage. But at this point, there are very few cards which Shawn needs to be worried about.
Yeah. And so we see still at the end step, the Krakus return the Vendilion Click, and Shawn's going to cycle through that Stifle that wasn't doing him very much good.
Right, and that I like that play a lot more than the bouncing of Gaddock.
So Shawn drew a Flooded Strand for the turn and a Brainstorm off of the Vendilion Click. And he goes ahead and brainstorms, finds another Brainstorm, a Tundra, and a Noble Hierarch, puts back the Tundra. I'd assume that he would put back either the Jace or the Noble Hierarch at this point, and then see what would you put back in his spot?
Okay, so he has with the Brainstorm right here.
Yeah, so he's already put back a Tundra. He needs to put back 1 more card.
I mean, I don't really see value in Noble Hierarch at this point. I would actually, like the I'd keep the Brainstorm. I'd like to just, I'd probably put back the Noble Hierarch. I don't see a real point in keeping it.
You would keep the Jace? I think you always keep the Brainstorm.
Yeah, I don't think you put back the Brainstorm. Which he does. The thing is like, with Jace, you either have 2 options. You either have decided, I'm going to play Jace this game, or I'm not going to play Jace this game. And, you should be thinking ahead, like having a Jace as a backup plan doesn't really work, because if your primary plan fails, then you probably have lost the game on the spot.
Yeah. So Shawn puts back the Brainstorm and the Tundra, plays a fetch land, attacks for 4 with the Vendilion Click, putting Charles on a 4-turn total clock, and passes the turn back. And Charles draws for the turn. I think he may have drawn either a Quirion Ranger or a Wirewood symbiote, but I'm just guessing based on the fact that the card appears to have an old-style frame here.
I'm not positive. Is that Flooded Strand off to the side in play, or in a second graveyard, or what's going on with the one up at the top?
So it did not fetch a land, and the library has not been shuffled since it was put somewhere, and it's far away from the graveyard, so I would guess that's in play.
Okay, he didn't actually sack a land on that night activation then.
He just put a Savannah in his graveyard.
Okay. Yeah, he has one too many.
I think his land count is actually correct here.
All right. Well, both players seem to agree on his land count, which seems to, I'm still not positive I think he may still have an extra one here. I don't think it's particularly relevant.
Yeah.
I don't, so I'm not really worried this is affecting the outcome of the game.
So we saw Shawn at the end of his turn, at the end of Charles's turn, return the Gaddock to his hand.
This card is pretty unbeatable for Elves once it's online.
Yeah.
Newsow's GT, will pretty much get a concession from Charles. I mean, he might make Shawn play it out, but that really eliminates almost like all of Charles's outs.
Yeah. And so, in addition to being able to kill creatures, he potentially had the ability to deal 8 damage next turn. But Shawn instead chooses to kill the Quirion Ranger and replay the Gaddock Teeg.
And Charles with draws Natural Order, still can't play anything under Gaddock Teeg. So the Gaddock Teeg actually surprisingly relevant in the matchup.
Yeah. There were potentially a lot of combo kill options that Charles was shut off from. But to be fair, like, the hand that Charles had did not seem particularly strong or explosive.
No, both players are on 6. Charles kept a hand that was basically on the back of Gaia's Cradle and Priest of Titania. His hand, with a Natural Order or with one Natural Order or one Green Sun's Zenith would have turned it into a turn 3 kill, because Shawn had the Swords to Plowshares and the Wasteland. Shawn was basically able to turn Charles' hand into a bunch of 1-mana 2/2s, which really, loses to cards like Knight of the Reliquary, which are better than a 2/2.
Loses to a 2/3. So let's take a look at the sideboards for both these players.
Apparently there's a pretty interesting backstory here. Apparently these are both Shawn's decks. So I don't know if you've ever had that. We've gone to a tournament, you've lent out a deck for the tournament, and then you play your buddy who you lent the deck to.
Yeah. So if Charles wins game 2, maybe Shawn's going to ask for his deck back at the start of game 3. So Shawn's options in the sideboard, he's got 4 Force of Wills, 3 Spell Pierce, 3 Geist of St. Traft, 2 Engineered Explosives, 1 Umezawa's Jite, 1 Path to Exile, and 1 Bajuka Bog.
The clear sideboard cards there are Engineered Explosives and Umezawa's Jite for the matchup.
Would you also bring in Path to Exile?
Yes, Path to Exile as well. You want basically, there are key linchpins like Heritage Druid that you need to kill on spot. And those are all excellent ways to do it. Umezawa's Jite can pretty much function as your win condition in the matchup. You know, getting 2 counters on a Jite is pretty synonymous with winning against the Elf deck.
So against the Elf deck in general, you know, should most sideboard plans be, I'm going to increase the amount of removal in my deck?
Well, yeah, I mean, the thing is, it's still a combo deck. It's a creature combo deck, so it's kind of like having 1-for-1 counterspell against a Storm deck. You know, it's maybe not against Storm deck, like maybe a 1-for-1 discard spell. It's not going to completely win you the game. You know, kind of like thought seizing a Storm player. It's good. It's not great. Right. You know, you'd rather have a 2-for-1. You'd rather like him to Turok the Storm player, and in the same way, you'd rather Engineered Explosives the Elves player than Path to Exile the Elves player. And that said, if you do, you know, pathing it is still fine. It's still okay to thought seize a Storm player.
Yeah. And that's why Umezawa's Jite is so good in this matchup, because it's just repeatable removal.
It's just repeatable, yeah. So, I mean, think about it like a Storm deck, something that you know, made them discard every single turn. You know, that'd be
Liliana.
Like a Liliana's great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're bringing in so Shawn is bringing in his additional removal, and potentially is taking out his Jace the Mind Sculptors, which seem kind of slow. Or actually,
yeah, I mean,
probably
Stifles are going to go first.
Yeah.
I mean, he's got some other deck cards. Stifle, Sylvan Safekeeper, those cards are all pretty bad. Jace is fine. You can win with Jace as well. It's not as good with Jace. Jace only, you know, his main ability in this matchup is to Fate Seal if you already have control of the board.
Yep.
Even that's a little fragile because he can still crack a fetch land.
So we're happy keeping Jason here, but if we had, you know, 3 more sideboard cards that were really exciting, we would bring those in place of Jace.
Yeah, I mean, it's unlikely you have enough board cards that the Jaces get cut. You know, is Jace exciting? No, not really. Okay. You don't board in. I don't think you board in Force of Will. It's not. You know, the only single card you really would want to counter would be like a green Glimpse of Nature. Would be the only card that I think is worthy of a Force.
You wouldn't be interested in it for a natural order?
I suppose, though, it depends on the board. Okay. Probably. I mean, the natural order is probably going for the win at that point. So yeah, I guess that there's 2 cards you can force, but that's still not a great plan. You're 2-for-1 yourself. You're not very excited about forcing against Elves.
Jace is probably going to be better there. So let's go ahead and take a look at the sideboard for Charles and his Elves deck.
Alright, so Charles' sideboard is 4 Cabal Therapies, a Natural Order, a Progenitus, a Scavenging Ooze, a Gaddock Teague. So Gaddock Teague of his own, hilariously enough. 2 Mindbreak Trap, 2 Abrupt Decay, Harmonic Sliver, Viridian Shaman, and Mortar Pod. He certainly will want the Harmonic Sliver or the Viridian Shaman. He wants to make sure he has, I would say, he wants to have an out to an Umezawa's Jite.
Yep.
Outside of that, Mortar Pod is decent in the matchup. It gives him, you know, it functions a lot of times in this matchup because Shawn has enough removal. Charles would be kind of on a hybrid aggro plan. Mortar Pod helps him. You know, in that matchup, for that game, for example, Mortar Pod would have killed Shawn. Right. He had enough creatures we could have just actually thrown 6 guys at him.
So, is this one of the matchups that you want to bring in the Progenitus because your opponent kind of has a slow deck and the way that they're going to beat you, you know, is not going to be able to deal with a 10-10 protection from everything? Or if not, you know, what matchups do you want the Progenitus to come in?
Well, I mean, so when I've played Elves in the past, I haven't typically used a Progenitus in the sideboard. You typically, you know, if you have a matchup where you feel like they're just killing all your things, Progenitus is probably like any matchup where you feel like your opponent is removal heavy is where you'd want to bring in Progenitus, because, you know, now instead of having to have this critical mass combo creatures, you really just need to resolve 1 spell. You know, I would be more inclined I was gonna say, like, I'd like it against a bug deck. Granted, they have Liliana, so they actually can kill a Progenitus. But, you know, decks which are more based on killing lots of stuff, okay, I would say would be where I'm inclined to bring it in.
So Charles is on the play here. He leads off with a turn 1 fetch for a forest, cast Green Sun Zenith to accelerate himself, getting a Dryad Arbor. and it looks like he's got a Nettle Sentinel, he's got a Gaia's Cradle, and I think he has an Elvish Visionary, and he's definitely got at least one more card. Shawn Yu is going to mirror the play. He's going to get a Tropical Island, he's going to Green Sun Zenith for a Dryad Arbor. Being on a mulligan at 6, he's in a little bit more trouble, though.
Right.
And Charles does have a natural order.
He does have the natural order, so it looks like he can go for that natural order using Dryad Arbor to get, well, presumably Progenitus. So he's going to go Elvish Visionary. His hand has Quirion Ranger, Nettle Sentinel appears. I can't see the rest of it.
Quirion Ranger, Nettle Sentinel, Gaia's Cradle, and Natural Order. I think that's it. That's left in there.
So he fetches for Bayou here. Bant is not a. Well, it does actually have some wastelands.
Yeah, it has wastelands, and he fetched for a basic forest the first turn, and I think the fact that there's a Knight of the Reliquary in Shawn's deck, is an indicator that wasteland is at least possible.
Interestingly, it appears that Shawn has sided in Geist of Saint Traft in this matchup. That's a little surprising to me.
That seems like the sort of card that you want against combo and you want against board control-y decks.
Right. Well, yeah, I mean, especially because.
But not this combo deck.
Because he has
good
2/2s. Yeah,
so
you're gonna have to. Remove
you want it against like Storm because you just need a clock, maybe. So Charles untaps.
Right, depending on his hand, it's very possible he has a kill this turn. With his opponent tapped out, it certainly is reasonable. All right, and a very good opportunity for a Spell Pierce. Charles did not play his land before going for the Green Sun Zenith, so he opened himself up to Spell Pierce there.
Yeah. So Charles, it looks like he was trying to set up playing the Gaia's Cradle and then natural ordering.
Well, he can still natural order here. He does still have 4 mana.
And it's possible that he actually was trying to bait the Spell Pierce here.
Right. So yeah, Quirion Ranger, followed up by Gaia's Cradle, natural order.
He's sacrificing the Nettle Sentinel here.
Yeah, he doesn't really. This isn't a game where he's going to be looping with Heritage Druids. And Nettle Sentinel is the weakest card here. Elvish Visionary has good interactions with Symbiote and Quirion Ranger also has a decent enough interaction that the Nettle Sentinel is the worst elf on the board. And he did side in the Progenitus plan.
Yep. So if instead he had sacrificed the Dryad Arbor and gone the Craterhoof Behemoth, wouldn't that have been a lethal attack?
Shawn being at 19, so they'd all only get they get plus 4/4, so it'd be.
So it'd be attacking
12. It would only be a 17-point attack.
Okay.
So I mean, which is cool. That puts him to 2.
Sure.
Yeah, it's a more sure. I mean, Bant doesn't have an answer to this guy. As far as I think Shawn literally does not have an answer to Progenitus.
We're not playing Terrafin here.
Right. I mean, he has protection from everything. So, Shawn doesn't really have life gain. He doesn't. Yeah. I don't know how he wins the game anymore.
Neither do I. So, Shawn plays Jace the Mind Sculptor. He brainstorms looking for an answer. Then he Green Sun Zenith to shuffle his deck, getting a Noble Hierarch. And here we are, natural ordering again. Shawn lets this resolve, get this Craterhoof Behemoth, and kaboom!
Right. So it's like, doesn't want to wait for the 2-turn clock with Progenitus. He's just going to go ahead and finish it on that turn.
I mean, why take 2 when you can do 1? 1 is better than 2. So Charles, a little bit more animated and happy.
Right. Yeah, here we go. These are so much better.
Tie things up, and Shawn, I was up a game, and then I got Progenitus. That guy's got protection from my deck.
Yeah, protection from everything. So a little bit, I think Shawn knew he was keeping a fairly weak hand in that matchup. He didn't have enough real tools to deal with elves. He was on a 6-card hand, and that really came back to get him.
And like he had acceleration into Jace, and he just has to hope that Charles isn't able to kill him quickly and that Jace is able to deliver, right? Mm-hmm. So Shawn's thinking a little bit. He's writing out some notes, maybe thinking about how he played that game and whether he could have played it some way differently. And this is a pretty good thing to do when you have a game that you could have taken some lines that are slightly different. Is take some notes on it, review it later, consult some of your friends that may have a different perspective from you or maybe better than you, and try to learn from it.
Yeah. So going into Game 3, no one's plan changes significantly going into this matchup. Shawn is still hoping he still needs to have some pace to his win, which is and what I mean there is he only can be a control deck for so long because of how the elf combo works.
Mm-hmm.
It's from one of those engine combos where there's no single, basically if Charles gets 5 spells cast, he probably will win the game with it based on how synergistic all the cards are with each other. So because of that, Shawn's going to need to find a lockdown card somewhat early. Like Umezawa's Jite said before is definitely his best card. Knight of the Reliquary is decent as well.
Yeah.
Or Jace, I think. Or he wants to make sure having at least one of those 3 cards in his opener is pretty important to Shawn in the matchup.
With Knight of the Reliquary, though, while it may be a powerful card, doesn't it actually have problems closing out the game against a creature dense deck like Elves?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, of the 3 cards I named, it's by far the worst of them. I think it can. It has some things it can do.
Mm-hmm.
With that, he can find wastelands to keep Charles off of Gaia's Cradles, which are fairly important. Elves is a very land-light deck, so if Shawn, it's possible he can wasteland him, maybe not out of the game, but to a very precarious spot.
To the extent that he's tapping his elves to cast things and isn't able to really have explosive glimpse of nature turns, that sort of thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So if you're Shawn, do you reevaluate the utility of counterspells here? Shawn brought in his Spell Pierces, and it didn't look like it was super effective to have those.
The Spell Pierce is actually not too bad. There are enough spells in Charles's deck. We do see Glimpse of Nature. Spell Piercing and Glimpse of Nature is actually a pretty good play.
And that's because that's 2 less mana they use to cast creatures and draw 2 less cards?
Usually they'll start the turn because you Glimpse of Nature with a lot of creatures in your hand, so you'll start the turn with maybe a Glimpse and 2 only on a 3 mana turn. So you'll be like Glimpse, something like Glimpse Elf Gaia's Cradle tap, blah, 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 then the Spell Pierce can function as a card counter spell a lot of the time.
Yeah. So we've started up. Looks like both players kept their 7-card hands, and Shawn has the same sort of opening of Green Sun Zenith into Dryad Arbor. He's got a Swords to Plowshares, a Vendilion Click, a Spell Pierce, a Caracas, and one other card, I believe.
Yes, he does have.
Looks like an Engineer Explosives.
Right, so the Engineer Explosives is one of those. It's another card that's quite good in the matchup. It's it's a 2 or 3 for 1 when it gets cast.
So Charles leads with the Wirewood Symbiote, which is going to force Shawn to use his first removal on that card.
On the Symbiote. Wirewood Symbiote, one of those cards that does not look particularly powerful when you read it, and then once you play against the elf deck, you realize it's actually one of the best cards in the deck.
Yep. It helps you combo, it protects your guys, it does a lot of different things for you. So Charles has another Wirewood Symbiote in hand. Looks
like two more Wirewood
Symbiotes, and he's okay trading here, I guess, because of that. He also has Fetch Land, he has Dryad Arbor.
That was a little aggressive. Even I pretty much never want to trade my symbiotes like that.
Yeah. He also has Aquarian Ranger, so he has a lot of the cards that sort of enable the combo, but he doesn't have the things that he wants to return with them, particularly Elvish Visionary.
So symbiote hands, I think you hit the nail on the head. Symbiotes with Elvish Visionaries is one of the game plans that Elves actually does have.
Mm-hmm.
But just symbiotes by themselves are a bunch of 1/1s. He does have a Green Sun Zenith in hand, which is strong. It probably will not resolve. And Shawn burns the second Swords of Plowshares then on the symbiote. He's very aware of how integral the card is.
And this is the problem with trading that symbiote so early, right?
He gave Shawn another removal spell, which he doesn't really want to do. The symbiotes are right now, because Charles' hand doesn't have a combo in it, the symbiotes are the engine of his hand. They are his action. So by trading that for a land, for a Dryad Arbor, I think he's getting a bad deal on the trade.
Yeah. So there seems to be some confusion about Swords to Plowshares or what turn it. It might be about what turn it is because they've
They've
confusion
created a
about
couple
the Green
lands.
Sun Zenith. And if it's relevant, we'll get the update from the judge. But it looks like it isn't, and we're proceeding as Shawn's turn.
He's counting as to, I think, whether he's... the only creature in his hand is the Vendilion Click. I guess the Vendilion Click, Spell Pierce, and Engineered Explosives. It helps him out to slow play the engine, not slow play, to hang on to the Engineered Explosives for a while, like until now.
Getting a 3-for-1 really valuable.
Yeah, I mean it'll just be a 2-for-1 because the symbiote will be able to save one of the creatures.
Right. So Charles goes ahead and plays his third symbiote and a Deathrite Shaman, then gets in there with his Quirion Ranger for 1. Shawn is fetching. It looks like at the end of the turn, we anticipate it's probably a Vendilion Click he's going to play here. And I don't think he has enough dead cards that he would want to target himself. I'm guessing he's going to target Charles and at the very least get some information.
Right.
And so we see Green Sun Zenith and Nettle Sentinel.
So it's interesting. There's typically the quote-unquote correct play is to take Green Sun Zenith, except that Shawn actually has a Spell Pierce in his hand. So he may not want to take the Green Sun Zenith, but if he doesn't take it, it'll be very suspicious.
Yep. So there appears to be a little bit of discussion. Charles showed his hand and then was like, "Nope, you don't want any of these," and hit it. And Shawn's like, let's be really sure about that.
He thinks that he said he was going to write it down, and he does take away the Green Sun Zenith nonetheless.
Yeah.
Which is fine. The Spell Pierce probably does need to be saved. Like, he probably wants to save the Spell Pierce in case of a natural order.
It's also possible that Shawn is going to be using his mana this next turn and doesn't want to have to leave up that one. But apparently not. He plays Engineer Explosives for 1, and he's going to go ahead and crack that. And Charles responds.
I don't know if that's... What he could have done is he could have kind of waited to crack it and then, cracked it. Well, never mind, sorry. He's only ever going to get 2 creatures with it, and that's because the bounce is actually, of the Unwirewood Symbiote, is actually part of the cost.
Yeah.
So you normally say, oh, he can wait until he can, wait until he tries to bounce something and get all 3 of them. Well, that doesn't actually work.
Yeah, that's one of the really tricky things about this elf deck. The Wirewood Symbiote and the Quirion Ranger, the bouncing that they do is part of the cost, and
you can't respond to it.
Yeah, so you get to mess around with Wastelands, returning your lands with Quirion Ranger, and also with your Dryad Arbor, which is a creature. Right. So Charles goes ahead, casts 3 elves, 2 Nettle Sentinels, and a Deathrite Shaman, then gets in with his Dryad Arbor.
So Charles is fairly committed to the aggro plan right now. I don't know if he really expects the aggro plan to work. He wants to make sure he has creatures in play so that when he draws a Green Sun Zenith or, one of his large creatures, be it Regal Force or Creator of Behemoth, that he can just cast it.
Yeah. And he is at the point now that, if he draws a Creator of Behemoth, he can cast it. He will need to, tap his Deathrite Shaman and his Dryad Arbor in order to do so. But that's a big chunk of damage just from the 2 Nettle Sentinels.
Right. He has 8 mana available at the moment. And we are on...
I think we're on Shawn's turn. And it looks like we've got an attack in, and Shawn is thinking about what he's going to play, and then he's like, oh, did you shuffle? Should I be cutting? And kind of distracts himself. But he decides to play Jace the Mind Sculptor, and I assume he's going to brainstorm.
Right, so Charles with no cards in hand. All right, and Shawn finds his win con here, which is the Umezawa's Jite.
Yeah. It's a pretty good brainstorm. He already had a blue card in hand for that Force of Will, so he's got a security blanket there, and he's got the Umezawa's Jite, which is going to put the game, out of Charles's reach unless something really drastic happens very soon. So it looks like we're going to put back the Brainstorm and the Umezawa's Jite because we're expecting to draw the Jite next turn. Doesn't really matter what cards you put back as long as you have Jite in hand next turn.
As long as
Jite
is not the second
card.
As long as it's not second down. Yep.
Yeah. So Charles untaps. Shawn tries to tap the Nettle Sentinels, but Charles says, "Oh no, they weren't tapped.
They were never
in the first
tapped
place."
to begin with.
Yeah. And we're going to go on the aggressive route
swinging.
Yeah, the two.
Yep.
Yeah, the
taking down
Nelson.
Jace, dealing 2 to Shawn.
And we know that this is basically irrelevant because of that Umezawa's GT on the top of Shawn's library.
Exactly.
Charles may be able to extend things a little bit, using the Deathrite Shaman to exile some creatures to gain some life.
But Land War Elves isn't going to do it. Shawn's going to be able to play and equip GT this turn while still having a Force of Will up for the remainder of the game.
Yeah. Umezawa's GT is a very powerful card in any creature mirror, which people learned immediately in the draft format or the sealed format for Kamigawa block, and it continues to have that power now. It's banned in Modern because it really makes.
Well, it wins creature mirrors.
Yeah, it wins creature mirrors,
and not just like it's good in them. It's creature mirrors become all about just who has a GT, which is a little powerful.
So another elf drawn for this turn to untap the Nettle Sentinel is a Finhorn elf. And we're going to see Shawn swing in again. What do you think of his sort of aggressive use of the GT counters to immediately kill 2 elves?
Well, he has Force of Will, so he can afford to use it aggressively. That said, I might want to keep 1 back just in case, to kill a card like a Wirewood Symbiote or a Heritage Druid. He decided to use both of them as to, what he did there was he's trying to minimize the amount of mana Charles has, by the way he played it. Charles already has a lot of mana no matter what he does.
With Gaia's Cradle, that isn't super relevant. So we see Shawn just...
Swords to Plowshares will come on,
Yeah, he's going to kill as many creatures as possible and really constrain what Charles can do. Maybe, a little bit of overuse of it, but he can afford it. He's far enough ahead.
Exactly. So he's cut Charles down on mana. Charles now only has four mana available to him.
And so Shawn finally uses the Wasteland they had to get rid of that Gaia's Cradle. He's eliminated all this mana that Charles has, and at this point...
the game is on.
The game is over.
The GT has taken over the game.
And we've basically been at that point since the GT came into play. Nihil Query to prevent any more beats and to provide a clock. Charles, stop untapping your Nettle Sentinel, please. Alright. And we now have a lethal attack with the Vendilion Click and the Knight.
Great. He's waiting. I'm not sure what about, but
Shawn may be savoring the moment here. This happens every now and then when 2 friends play each other.
Shawn, you defeat Charles Wong in 2 games to 1.
Yeah.
These players are both at 4 and 1, I believe. For the round.
They both.
So Shawn, you stays live for top 8. Charles will go to 3 and go to 4 and 2.
And Charles is still in the hunt for top 16. And even if he doesn't make that, he's got a very good chance of top 32 or 64 for some money.
I'm going to bring you back to the booth while we see if we have another match for you guys.